In September of 1994, the Bennett family, Robert, Ellen, and their 2 children, packed their bags for a weekend trip to their cabin in rural Idaho. They told neighbors it was just to get away for a few days. The weather was turning, the leaves were changing. It was supposed to be a quiet family retreat before school and work routines locked back in. They were never seen again. The front door was locked. The truck was gone. But inside the house? The beds were made. Plates were still drying on the kitchen rack. A jacket Ellen always wore was hanging by the door. It was as if they planned to return. Search teams combed the roads between town and the cabin. They found no vehicle, no crash site, no sign of distress. The family had simply vanished, as if they'd been erased. Over the next 10 years, the case grew cold. Until one afternoon in 2004, during a quiet audit of unprocessed evidence, a young officer opened a mislabeled cardboard box. Inside was a disposable camera from the Bennett's home. Undeveloped. When they got the photos back, one image, taken from inside the house, made a veteran detective physically step back because it showed someone that shouldn't have been there. When the Bennetts went missing, there wasn't much panic at first. People disappear all the time, especially in a place like Idaho, where there's endless land, winding highways, and plenty of space to vanish into. But the Bennetts weren't the kind of family anyone expected to just leave. Robert, the father, was a mechanical engineer at a nearby power plant. Routine, steady, a man who took pride in precision. He paid his mortgage early, rotated his own tires, and kept the lawn like a golf course. Ellen worked part-time at the elementary school as a teacher's aide. Quiet, kind. The type who remembered every student's birthday, even years later. They had 2 kids, Jason, age 9, and Katie, age 6. They lived in a 2-story home just on the edge of town. Vinyl siding, plastic wind chimes on the porch, a swing set in the backyard. Normal, at least on paper. The day they left, neighbors saw them packing up their station wagon. Grocery bags, a cooler, sleeping bags strapped to the roof. Jason held a small handheld camcorder. Katie was carrying a worn pink rabbit. The family waved as they pulled away. It was supposed to be a weekend in the mountains. Their cabin near Lake Thornberry was about 90 minutes out, a place they'd gone dozens of times before. That was Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, no one had heard from them. Ellen hadn't called her sister, which she always did after trips. Robert missed a shift at the plant without notice, something coworkers said had never happened once in 15 years. By Tuesday, police had been notified. The first stop was the house. The front door was locked. Inside, the house was pristine. Mail stacked neatly by the door. Coffee mugs rinsed in the sink. Ellen's calendar still showed the weekend marked in blue ink. CABIN. Nothing looked out of place. Except that the dog, a golden retriever named Daisy, had been left behind. No food, no water. That was strange. They never left the dog. Police opened a missing persons file and began searching the drive between town and the cabin. Helicopter sweeps, divers in the lake, rangers on foot. The cabin itself was empty, tidy. Food in the fridge, clothes in the bedroom, the sheets pulled back like someone had slept there, or meant to. The family's car was never found. No tracks, no witnesses, no receipts. It was like someone had erased the weekend. The initial report described the case as low risk, no history of domestic violence, no criminal records, no known debts, no custody disputes. But still, something felt off. Detectives combed the family's personal records, but there was no sign of a plan to run. No large withdrawals, no packed storage units, no motel stays under fake names. Within 2 weeks, the story faded from the local news. Within 2 months, the case went cold. And by the following year, the Bennetts were just a question that never got answered. One of the detectives who had worked the case early on, Detective Avery Cole, kept the folder on his desk longer than most. He reread the report sometimes, especially the one from the ranger who'd found the half-burned logbook in the cabin fireplace. Only the corners were singed, and there were just 3 lines written inside. "Didn't sleep," he walked again. "Don't wake the kids." The handwriting matched Ellen's. At the time, it hadn't meant much. The cabin was old, drafty. Maybe someone walking outside had startled her. A coyote, a branch scraping the siding. Or maybe she was talking about Robert, a restless sleeper, maybe pacing at night. But Detective Cole didn't like that 3rd line. "Don't wake the kids." It stayed with him. He retired in 2001, and in 2004, a junior officer named Marissa Duvall was helping clean out old boxes at the precinct warehouse when she pulled one down from the shelf marked "Unprocessed Evidence, 1990 to 1999." The box had no date, no log sheet, just a piece of tape on the front with the name Bennett written in faded Sharpie. Inside were odds and ends, a broken keychain, a Ziploc bag with toy blocks, and a yellow Kodak disposable camera. Still undeveloped. Marissa almost tossed it in with the backlog, but something stopped her. The name. She remembered the story. Everyone who'd grown up in Idaho Falls did, so she dropped off the film at the only photo lab still running in town. 3 days later, she picked up the envelope and opened it right there in the parking lot. The first photos were typical: Robert behind the grill, Ellen brushing Katie's hair, Jason making a face at the camera. Then a few of the cabin's interior, the fireplace, the staircase, a board game on the table. Marissa flipped through them slowly, until she got to the last one. The final photo was darker, slightly blurry. Low contrast. It had been taken indoors, at night, likely inside the cabin. The furniture looked pushed aside. There was no one smiling, no one posing, just a dimly lit living room and a single figure near the edge of the frame. It was Robert. He wasn't looking at the camera. He wasn't doing anything at all, really, just standing there, arms at his sides, no expression. But something about his posture felt off. He wasn't mid-step. He wasn't distracted. He looked paused, like someone had called his name, and he was listening. The light from the flash had washed out part of the image, but his face was clear enough. Marissa stared at it for a long time. Because in a roll of photos filled with laughter, messy toys, and movement, this was the only one where everything was still. And Robert didn't look like himself. Marissa Duvall didn't know what exactly to do with the photo at first. She wasn't a detective, just a young officer sorting through storage on light duty. But she'd grown up hearing about the Bennetts. Everyone her age had. It was one of those local stories that never faded, even if it never got solved. A whole family gone. No goodbye. No headlines. Just gone. She placed the developed film envelope into a fresh evidence bag and logged it as recovered property, then handed it off to the detective division with a note clipped on top. Bennett case. Previously undeveloped film recovered 10 years later. Final frame may need review. Possible subject? Robert? Detective Lyle Henning was the one who picked it up. He'd been a rookie back when the Bennetts disappeared. Worked the search perimeter, helped organize the dive team near the lake. He still remembered the cabin, the silence in the woods, the way it felt when you walked inside, like you were already too late. He stared at the photo for a long time. Robert wasn't facing the lens. His shoulders were slightly hunched. His face held no visible expression, and his hands were down at his sides. It didn't scream disturbing, but it wasn't right either. In the other photos, Robert had been easy to spot, always moving, always talking, always gesturing, laughing with his kids, squinting into the sun. But in this one, he looked distant, disconnected, like something had already shifted. Henning walked the photo down to forensics for a digital scan. They bumped the contrast, rebalanced the light, and examined it pixel by pixel. There were no hidden figures, no intruders, nothing obviously out of place. Except for one small detail, the timestamp, 3:14 a.m. None of the other photos had timestamps. The film was old, the metadata inconsistent, but that one image, the last one, had embedded data, and it placed the picture in the middle of the night, in the cabin, after everyone else would have been asleep. And if Robert had taken the photo, Why wasn't it pointed at anything? Why snap a picture of a dark living room? No flash subject, just stillness? Henning requested the old file from archives. The original case report was thick, hundreds of pages, interviews, photos of the cabin interior, inventory lists, search maps. One of the first reports stood out. Interview notes with a neighbor, Mrs. Calhoun, who lived across the street from the Bennetts. She had told officers something odd back in '94, that Robert had come to her door the night before they left and asked if she could check their mail while they were gone. Said they'd only be gone 2 nights, but then he added something she'd never forgotten. He said, "If anyone asks, tell them you saw us leave." At the time, it hadn't raised alarms. He was probably just joking, but when Henning read it again 10 years later, it didn't land the same. Why would someone say that? Why preemptively mention someone asking? Henning reread Robert's employment records. No red flags, no formal complaints, clean attendance. Co-workers described him as quiet, reliable, a numbers guy. A little serious, but good at what he did. But then Henning came across one note. 6 months before the disappearance, Robert had filed for 2 weeks of paid time off, said it was for a family trip out of state. But payroll confirmed he never took it, and no one had seen him or the family leave town. He'd canceled the request last minute. No explanation. That wasn't illegal, but when you stack it on top of everything else, the 3 a.m. photo, the offhand comment to the neighbor, the tight-lipped work habits, it added weight. Henning decided to drive up to the cabin site. It hadn't been touched in years. The land had reverted to state ownership, the property taxes long unpaid. The building was still standing, barely. One side was sagging, the roof warped. He didn't bring backup, didn't tell anyone. He just wanted to see it. The moment he stepped inside, the smell hit him. Old wood, dust, Moldavian. Everything was exactly where it had been a decade earlier. The bunk beds, the breakfast nook, the empty bookshelf. But as he swept a flashlight across the far corner of the main room, he noticed something strange. A square cut into the floor, a trapdoor about 2 feet across, flush with the boards. It had never been mentioned in the original reports. He checked the photos from 1994. The floor was clear in every one. Had it been added later? Or overlooked? Henning pried it open. It creaked, badly, and revealed a crawl space about 3 feet deep. Empty, just dirt. Except, buried against the far wall, half covered in loose soil, was a stack of flattened cardboard boxes. He climbed down, crouched low, and brushed them off. 3 boxes, 2 completely empty. The third had a name printed on the side in black marker. Katie's things. Keep safe. He pulled it out, heart in his throat. Inside were children's books, a stuffed rabbit, and a folder of papers, drawings, crayon notes, school handouts. One drawing showed 4 stick figures holding hands in front of the cabin. But one figure, the smallest, was scribbled out in red. Not erased, just crossed out. Over and over again. Henning stared at it, then looked up at the trapdoor above him, now casting a square of gray light across the space. There were no answers down here, but there were more questions now than ever before. Detective Henning sat in his car outside the cabin for almost an hour. The box he'd pulled from beneath the floorboards sat in the passenger seat, sealed back up, but the weight of it was different now. Not physical, emotional. He kept thinking about the crayon drawing, 4 stick figures, hand in hand, standing in front of the cabin. The figure on the far right, the smallest one, scribbled out in red. Not once, not sloppily, carefully, deliberately. It didn't feel like something a 6-year-old would do, at least not randomly. Henning drove the evidence back to the station and booked it in with a quiet note. Found at Bennett cabin, not in original inventory. He left the folder of drawings aside for analysis. Then he went back through the original witness interviews. One stood out that hadn't seemed important before. Jason Bennett's teacher, Ms. Alvarez, had told investigators that Jason had come to school unusually tired the week before the trip. He'd put his head down on the desk. Didn't want to go outside for recess. She remembered one thing he'd said when she asked what was wrong. He was walking again last night. She assumed he meant a neighbor, or maybe the dog, but paired with Ellen's logbook note from the cabin fireplace, he walked again. Don't wake the kids. It was too much of a coincidence to ignore. Henning pulled the forensic copy of the family's house floor plan. Jason's room was on the second floor, back corner. So was Robert's. Henning visited the Bennett's old home the next morning. A new family lived there now. They let him walk through politely, a little curious, a little nervous. He stood at the top of the stairs and looked down the hallway. Jason's room was on the left. Robert and Ellen's was on the right. The hallway creaked. If someone had walked back and forth late at night, you'd hear it. He turned back to the hallway window and stared out toward the yard. Leaves had changed, just like the weekend they vanished. It felt like time had curled back on itself. Before he left, the new homeowner mentioned something strange. "We still get their mail sometimes," she said. "Usually junk, but about a year ago we got a manila envelope with no return address. Had a single Polaroid inside, just trees. We didn't think anything of it." Henning asked to see it. The woman fished it out from a drawer. The photo was old, faded, and slightly curled at the corners. It showed a stretch of pine trees and brush, but not much else. No visible people, no landmark. Except in the bottom corner, barely in frame, was the roof of a cabin. Henning recognized it immediately. Lake Thornberry. He thanked the woman and took the photo in for analysis. The lab confirmed it had been taken in early spring based on tree condition and lighting angle. The paper and film dated it somewhere around 1995 or 96. Henning wondered who had taken it and why it showed up a decade later. He sent a request to search old postal logs, hoping for handwriting samples or similar envelopes. Nothing came back. Later that week, the forensics team called him. They had cleaned up the photo from the camera, the one with Robert standing still in the living room. They enhanced the image. Nothing extraordinary popped up. No hidden figures, no reflections. But they noticed something subtle. In Robert's left hand, down near his hip, he was holding something. It was almost entirely in shadow. But with the contrast adjusted, the object looked like a small metallic cylinder, likely the same make and size as the disposable camera itself. It wasn't the one that took the picture, that had been found in the house. So it had to be another, possibly a second camera. Henning leaned back in his chair. If Robert had taken that photo and someone else had taken another, it meant there might be a second roll of undeveloped film. He ordered a second property check. No luck. Henning widened the request, checked nearby pawnshops, estate auctions, even state police evidence from unrelated cases in the area. Still nothing. Until a week later, a retired game warden named Lenny Briggs reached out. He'd heard about the renewed interest in the Bennett case from a friend on the force. And he said he remembered something. "I found a camera out there," he said. "Years ago, on the Lakeside Trail. Didn't know what to do with it. Turned it into the ranger station, but I don't think anyone picked it up." Henning asked for a date. Had to be summer of '95. I remember because it was the same week those kayakers found that burned tent across the ridge. Henning made the call. The ranger station still had a box labeled "Lost and Found," unsorted from the '90s. And inside was a second disposable camera. Dusty, faded, but still intact. He brought it back to the lab himself. 3 days later, the film was processed. 7 photos in total. 2 blurry shots of trees. One of the lake at sunset, one of a car door, another of someone's feet on a dirt trail. Then, the 6th photo. It showed the cabin porch. Dark, a single bulb on. No one in frame, but the door was open. And in the bottom corner of the photo, half cut by the edge of the frame, was a boot. Just a boot, facing the camera, as if someone had just stepped outside and stopped. Detective Henning stared at the photograph, the 6th one from the second recovered camera. It didn't say much on its own, just the porch, a dark doorway, a light bulb casting a small halo above the frame. And that boot, right at the bottom edge, barely in view. Worn, scuffed, laced high up the ankle. The detail that caught his attention was the angle. Whoever took the photo was standing below the porch, not on it, but near the bottom step, aiming slightly up. And the boot wasn't moving. It was still. Which raised a question: was this photo taken by one of the Bennetts? Or of them? He brought the photo to the lab. They ran a quick scan on the lighting and object size. The boot matched a men's size 11 hiking model that was sold in the early 90s. Henning checked Robert Bennett's DMV records. He wore size 11 shoes. It wasn't a confirmation, but it narrowed the field. He pulled out the next photo, the seventh and final shot from the roll. This one was harder to decipher. It had been taken from inside the cabin, but the flash had blown out much of the foreground. What was visible were faint outlines, the edge of a table, part of a window frame, and what looked like a spiral-bound notebook on the floor. The kind Ellen had used for the family logbook. Henning examined the timestamp. This photo had been taken just after 4 a.m., nearly an hour after the final photo on the first camera. Someone was still awake, still moving, still taking pictures. He sat with that thought for a while. 2 cameras, 2 nights, and a series of small, scattered moments that, taken together, painted something quiet and strange. Robert standing still in a dark room at 3 a.m., a boot captured at the edge of a porch, a notebook discarded on the floor. The original missing persons file had said nothing about a second camera, nothing about someone being awake into the early morning hours. Henning went back to the cabin. He didn't call anyone this time. He wanted to be alone with the space. It was colder now. The trees bare, wind slipping through cracks in the roof like breath. He stood in the doorway and looked out at the trail where the boot might have been photographed. It was steep, rocky, a narrow path with loose gravel and patches of overgrown brush. Not a place someone would walk at night, unless they were looking for something or leaving. Henning turned back inside and sat near the fireplace. The ash had long since settled, but when he swept a gloved hand across the edge of the hearth, he caught something, a flake of blackened paper wedged into the gap. He pulled it out gently. It was part of a notebook page, mostly burned, only a few words still legible. Woke again. Didn't speak. Just stood. I think he... That was all. Same handwriting as Ellen's. Henning placed it into a bag and wrote one word on the label. Fragment. The cabin was giving up pieces now, small, quiet, but consistent. Back at the station, he reopened the original interview with Ellen's sister, Margaret. In 1994, she had told investigators that Ellen had called her the week of the trip and mentioned she was nervous about the drive. But buried deeper in the transcript was a single line Henning hadn't noticed before. Margaret had said, she sounded tired, said Robert hadn't been sleeping much, said he was acting distracted. The interviewer had moved on quickly, not pushing the point. Henning picked up the phone and called Margaret himself. She still lived in Spokane. Answered after 3 rings. When he explained who he was, her voice tightened. I always knew something wasn't right, she said, but they told me there was nothing to go on, that they probably got lost. Henning asked what she meant by wasn't right. There was a pause. Then she said, it was the way she said it. Robert's quiet again, like it had happened before. Henning asked if Ellen ever mentioned anything specific. She once said he'd wake up in the middle of the night and just stand in the hallway, wouldn't move, wouldn't talk. She thought he was sleepwalking. But I don't know. Henning thanked her and hung up. He added it to his notes. It wasn't proof, but it was a pattern. He drove back to the evidence room and pulled out the final camera envelope one more time. He looked at that last photo, the one with the notebook on the floor. Zoomed in. And this time he noticed something he'd missed. A shadow in the lower right-hand corner. Barely there. Faint. But tall enough, dark enough, to suggest someone was standing just outside the flash range. Watching. Still. Detective Henning printed the final photo again, larger this time. He pinned it to the whiteboard in his office and stepped back. There it was, the table, the notebook on the floor, the edge of the window, and that vague shadow in the corner. He couldn't explain it. Not yet. It wasn't proof of anything, but it made him feel something. That creeping instinct cops get when they know a story isn't adding up, not because of what's there, but because of what isn't. He stared at that shadow for almost 10 minutes. Then he reached for the case file and flipped back to the original cabin inventory. The 1994 team had listed everything they found: dishes, clothing, firewood, linens. But something was missing from the list that should have been obvious. There was no mention of the notebook, the one Ellen wrote in, the same one partially seen in that last photo. If it wasn't logged and it wasn't there during the first sweep, then someone had removed it, and whoever took that photo might have been the one who hid or destroyed it. Henning contacted forensics. He asked them to run a trace analysis on the spiral binding from the notebook visible in the image. Look for common brands, page size, paper color, anything that could match a specific notebook style. 2 days later, they got a match. A 1992-94 spiral journal sold in limited batches at a bookstore in town, Spindle's Paper and Supply. Henning checked the store's records. They were old, mostly paper-based, but the manager had a list of recurring customers from the early 90s. One name stood out: Robert Bennett. He'd purchased 2 of those notebooks 6 months before the family disappeared. Henning requested a warrant to search the cabin property again, this time with a metal detector and ground-penetrating radar. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but the DA signed off, and a small team was sent in with shovels and sensors. It was quiet work, slow. Most of the soil was frozen from the early frost. Then, near the tree line, behind the cabin, a soft alert. About 2 feet down, they hit something dense, wrapped in plastic. Waited. It wasn't a body. It was the second notebook, still sealed, still intact. They took it back to the lab and dried it carefully, page by page. Ellen's handwriting filled most of it. There were daily notes, what they ate, when they arrived, how the kids had argued over a board game. But the entries grew shorter, more uncertain, as they neared the last pages. Then, 3 days in, there was this. Robert stayed up again last night. Didn't speak, just watched. I heard the car door open at 2 a.m. No one else heard it. Then the next day. He says he's fine, says he's thinking about work, but there's nothing to think about. I don't think he's sleeping at all. And then the final entry. He told me not to wake the kids, said we'd leave in the morning. I'm writing this quietly. I don't think we're leaving. That was the last page. Henning stared at it for a long time. The date on that entry matched the timestamp of the final photo exactly, 4:03 a.m. Whoever had taken that picture had done so within minutes of Ellen writing her last words. That notebook should have been in the cabin when police first arrived. Instead, it had been buried, deliberately. And there was only one person who could have done that between the moment the note was written and the time the search began. Robert. Henning didn't say it aloud. He didn't write it in the file. But he wrote a question on a yellow sticky note and stuck it beside the photo on the whiteboard. Was she trying to leave? That afternoon, he called Jason and Katie's elementary school. The secretary remembered the case, said she'd find their files in the archive boxes. When Henning picked them up, there was something extra clipped to Jason's file. A drawing folded twice. The date matched the week before the disappearance. It showed 4 stick figures again, like the one Henning had found in the crawlspace box. But this time, the smallest figure wasn't scribbled out. Instead, the father figure was drawn differently. No face, just an outline, and a red shape in his hand. Henning tilted the paper under the light. The shape wasn't clear. Could have been a tool, a bag, a flashlight. But Jason had drawn it in a different color from the rest, the only thing in red. Henning placed the drawing next to the photo of Robert in the cabin, the one where he's standing alone in the living room at 3 a.m. He enlarged it again, same posture, same angle, and in that photo, Robert's hand is clenched around something, too small to identify, but in light of the drawing, it suddenly felt like a clue. Henning leaned back. The trail wasn't cold anymore. It was turning. Detective Henning returned to the whiteboard and stared at the collage he'd assembled. 2 photographs, both taken around 3 to 4 a.m., a buried notebook, a child's drawing, and a string of quiet warnings written in Ellen's own hand. It was no longer a question of whether something had happened at the cabin. The question now was how much had already begun before the family ever got there. Henning went back to the original 1994 phone records. Landline data was limited, but they had outbound calls listed from the Bennett home in the days before the trip. 2 days before they left, Robert had made 4 calls, 1 to his work, 2 to the gas company, and 1 to a disconnected number. Henning pulled archived records from the phone company. The number had once belonged to a hardware store, Greystone Supply, closed in '93, the same store that used to sell hunting equipment and outdoor gear. Henning called a former employee listed in the town records. The man remembered Robert, not well, but said he used to come in quiet, always bought the same thing, rope and utility tools, nothing illegal, just specific. Then, out of curiosity, Henning requested the credit card statement from the Bennett's final month, what little data still existed. There was a charge just 5 days before they vanished to Rustic Rental, a place near the highway that rented out trailers and small tow-behinds. But there had never been any mention of a trailer in the police file. No witness ever reported seeing one hitched to the back of the family car. Henning drove out to Rustic Rental and found it still standing, though now under new ownership. He asked about old ledgers, and the manager was kind enough to pull a dusty binder from the back. Robert's name was there. The note beside it read, "Rented utility box trailer. 3 days. Customer returned in person. No issues. Return date, 2 days after the family was reported missing." Henning read the line again. Customer returned in person. He flipped the page. A scrawled signature, barely legible, but underneath it someone had written, "No hitch needed. Customer said unloading at property." Henning closed the book. Robert had come back, at least once. It wasn't a theory anymore. It was a confirmed movement. Whatever had happened up at the cabin, Robert had left afterward, returned the trailer, and then disappeared completely. Henning asked for security footage, knowing it was too old. The manager laughed, said they hadn't even installed cameras until 2001. Still, the ledger alone changed the timeline. The last confirmed sighting of Robert Bennett had been after the family vanished, and no one had ever known. Henning added a new label to the board. Robert, movement confirmed. Post-disappearance. That night, Henning pulled the notebook out again, the one Ellen had hidden or left behind. He flipped to the last full entry, reading it slowly, as if something might change in the spaces between the words. He told me not to wake the kids, said we'd leave in the morning. I'm writing this quietly. I don't think we're leaving. It didn't read like panic. It read like acceptance, like she already knew. Henning circled one phrase. We'd leave in the morning. It was the only line that still sounded like hope. Then he went to the corner of his office and pulled down the large fold-out topographic map of the Thornberry area. He traced the roads, the switchbacks, the lake, and finally he placed a red thumbtack where the cabin stood, then another at the last confirmed location of the family's vehicle, then a third where Rustic Rental sat, 2 hours away. The path Robert had taken after everything happened wasn't back into town. It was west, toward the old mining trails. Most of that land had long since grown over, forgotten fire roads, abandoned dirt paths winding into federal forest land. If someone wanted to disappear, that's where they'd go. Henning submitted a request for an aerial scan. 2 days later, he got a hit. A satellite image from mid-1995, part of a forest survey. The photo showed a narrow clearing near the base of a ridge. In that clearing, a faint square shape, barely visible. Too small for a cabin, too even to be natural, possibly a structure. Henning zoomed in. The quality was low, but something about the layout felt intentional. He placed a new pin on the board, then stared at the path between the final ledger date and the edge of that forest. That night, he called in a favor with the local search and rescue unit. He didn't say what he was looking for, just asked for someone who could guide him deep into land that no longer had names. And first thing the next morning, they set out for that clearing, one quiet step closer to the truth. The air changed as they moved deeper into the trees. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when Henning and the SAR guide started their hike, packs light, gear minimal. The path wasn't marked. It hadn't been a trail in years. Brush had reclaimed most of it. What had once been a dirt road was now a thread of flattened grass and forgotten fence posts. The guide, a man named Reed, moved with the kind of ease that came from a lifetime outdoors. He didn't ask questions, just followed the coordinates Henning had provided from the old satellite image. They walked for hours, no sound except their boots and the wind brushing branches overhead. At 11:42 a.m., they reached the ridge. Reed pointed toward a depression in the brush about 50 yards off. "There," he said, "that's not natural." Henning moved forward, heart pounding in a slow, dull rhythm. The clearing was smaller than it looked in the photo, maybe 30 feet across. At the center was a mound of earth, just high enough to suggest something had once stood there. Reed knelt and brushed away some of the top layer. Underneath, corrugated steel. A roof, buried. Henning stepped back, called it in. They marked the coordinates and requested a small excavation team. Within 48 hours, a forensics crew arrived with equipment. Quietly. No press, no public record. What they unearthed was a one-room structure. Wood walls beneath the steel roof partially collapsed. A hunting cabin long abandoned. But inside, under layers of dirt and time, they found objects that shouldn't have been there. A child's shoe. A rusted thermos with the initials KB scratched into the bottom. Katie Bennett. A camping lantern that matched the brand on the Bennett family's cabin receipt from '94. And under a tarp in the far corner, dry despite years of weather, a small sleeping bag, zipped shut around nothing. They dusted everything, bagged it, logged it. Henning stood in the doorway and stared at the rot-soft walls. He imagined Robert standing there, alone, maybe watching, maybe waiting, but not for help. There were no signs of violence, no signs of anyone else entering after, just items left and forgotten. Henning's gut told him this wasn't where it ended, but maybe where Robert had tried to disappear, or had started to unravel. Back at the station, he reviewed everything. The second camera, the notebook entries, the buried journal, the one confirmed sighting of Robert after the family's disappearance, returning the rental trailer in person. And now this. A remote shelter with the daughter's belongings inside. But no sign of Jason, no trace of Ellen. Henning started to wonder, what if they had never made it past the first cabin? What if only Robert came here? And if so, why bring Katie's things? The evidence didn't say. It only suggested. That night, Henning drove to the lake, parked his car near the trailhead, and walked the ridgeline where the family's truck had once been expected to pass. He looked down over the edge, scanning for anything, any shape or color that didn't belong. The search team had combed this area in '94, but methods were different then. No drones, no LiDAR, just footwork. Henning walked about 50 yards down a side slope before stopping. There, tangled in roots, was a piece of faded cloth, dark red, canvas. He pulled it free, a piece of a seat cushion. He looked farther down. At the edge of the drop, rusted metal, just barely visible beneath the soil and moss. He called it in. The forensics team returned with ground-penetrating equipment. It didn't take long. The truck was there, upside down, buried by time and landslide. Inside were skeletal remains. 3 sets, 1 adult, 2 children. personal effects matched dental records. Jason, Katie, Ellen. Robert was not among them. The excavation took 3 days. The truck was pulled out slowly, piece by piece. Rusted panels, warped frame, glass long since turned to dust. The bodies were removed with care. What remained of them was fragile, weathered, but still enough to confirm who they were. Ellen, Jason, Katie. Each set of remains was found in a seat belt, each still facing forward. The impact had likely been sudden, a slide off the ridge. The soil had given way, and the truck had rolled once, maybe twice, before settling against the rocks below, covered by earth and time. But the condition of the vehicle told a different story. The ignition was off. The emergency brake had not been applied, and all 4 tires were intact. It didn't look like an accident. It looked like someone had coasted the truck forward and let it fall. Henning stood at the edge of the ridge where the front wheels had likely rolled over. There were no guardrails, no warning signs, just an open view and loose gravel. He looked down at the wreckage. 3 lives sealed into silence for 10 years. But still no sign of Robert, no bones, no blood, no trace. Only what he had left behind, buried notebooks, undeveloped film, fragments of something unraveling in the final hours. The official cause of death for Ellen and the children was listed as accidental vehicular trauma, pending further review. But no one in the department believed that anymore. They knew who had walked away. They just didn't know where he'd gone. Henning reopened the utility trailer rental file, reread the part that said Robert had returned it in person. The manager confirmed. No one was with him. He was calm, wore sunglasses, paid in cash. That was 3 days after the family was reported missing, which meant Robert had stayed somewhere after the crash, before coming back to town. Henning remembered the second shelter, the buried one deep in the woods. He remembered the sleeping bag, the silence, and he started to wonder if Robert had planned it all, or only parts of it. Had something snapped in him? Had it been planned for months, or had the weekend gone off track in a way no one would ever fully understand? The notebooks painted a picture of someone withdrawing, not angry, just distant, present, but slipping. And the photos, the ones from the camera, showed a man awake when everyone else was asleep, holding something, standing alone in the dark. Whatever had gone through Robert's mind that night, he never wrote it down, and he never came back. The discovery of the bodies made the local news, not front page, not national, just a brief story on the evening broadcast. After a decade-long mystery, the remains of the Bennett family were found this week in a remote section of wilderness outside Idaho Falls. The anchor didn't mention Robert, didn't say the father was still missing, didn't say his name at all. The camera photos were sealed in the file, the notebooks kept in a locked drawer. There were no charges, no suspects, just one man, gone. Henning visited the site one last time in early winter. The trees were bare, wind cutting across the ridge. He stood near the drop and looked down again at where the truck had come to rest. And in that stillness, he pictured Robert, not smiling, not shouting, just quiet, hands on the wheel, the kids asleep, Ellen beside him, and the world slowly tilting, not with rage, but with decision. He left flowers at the site, didn't say a word. Back at the station, the file was marked closed, but Henning didn't remove it from his drawer. Sometimes, when the office was quiet, he would unfold that final photo again, the one from the cabin, with Robert standing in the dark. And each time it looked a little different. Some nights he looked lost. Other nights like he'd already made up his mind. But the one thing that never changed was the silence. Because for all the evidence, all the timelines, all the questions answered, Robert Bennett was never found, and no one knows if he ever meant to be.